Okay, let's talk about lesson 2.3. A function is a special kind of correspondence between two sets. The first set is called the domain. We talked about this in the other lesson. It's also your x, your input. The second set is called the range, which is your y value or your output. For any number of the domain, there is exactly one member of the range that corresponds to it, and this is called the function. Okay, so this says find the domain and the range of the function f whose graph is shown below. So the function contains 4 ordered pairs, and it can be written as, so we're just talking about the entire function right now. So remember we kind of talked about walking on the elevator, so this point would be 1, 0. It doesn't really matter what order we put these in. This point right here would be -5. We walk to -5, go up to 1. This point up here, we would go to 4 up to 3. And this point down here, we would walk to 3 and go down to -5. So 3, -5. So the domain is the set of all the first coordinates. Now, usually we do list them in order. You don't have to do that, but we're talking about these numbers right here. And so the domain, the smallest one would be the -5, and then we would have 1, and then we would have 3, and then we would have 4. Okay, now you don't have to list them in order, it's just that's the way that people usually do it. When we talk about the range are our y values. And so on our range, the smallest one I see is -5. Then we would have a 0, a 1, and a 3. Okay, so this function has a domain of -5, 1, 3, and 4, and a range of -5, 0, 1, and 3. Okay, so this one says, for the graph of the function, determine g of 2. So I want you to recall that we said f of x is really just a fancy way for saying y. And so in this problem, the 2 is in the place of the x. So what we know is that x equals 2. What we're trying to figure out is, well, then what is y equal to? So when we go over here and we go to x equals 2 and we go up and we go over to y, we can see that the answer is 1. Okay, so the next question is backwards. It kind of is saying, okay, now we know y is equal to -1, but what is, y is equal to -1, so what is x equal to? So when we go to y is equal to -1, y is equal to -1 right here. We actually have 2 possible answers. We've got 4, or it could be -4. So I'm going to write both of those right here. So it's possible to put 4, and it's also possible to put -4. So in the computer lab, it's actually going to just ask you to put both of the answers with a comma in between them. The domain is asking you, well, what can x possibly be? In this graph, these arrows mean that this just continues on to forever and ever. And when you're considering the domain, you really want to think from left to right. Is it possible that even way out here at -infinity, that x wouldn't have a value? Well, no, it's always going to have a value. And even if you go to positive infinity this way, there's going to be a value down here that represents x. So x would be all real numbers. Okay, on the range, you're going to ask yourself, what could y be? And on the range, you really want to start at the bottom and go up. So we're talking about the range. I'm starting down here. And even way down here on my graph, I'm going to have some y values because this goes down forever. This v keeps going forever. In fact, it keeps going forever and ever and ever until we get to this point right here where y is equal to 3. So our domain is all y's such that, our range is all y's such that y is less than or equal to 3. So it doesn't go past 3, but it could be equal to 3. So when you're thinking about the domain, you want to think of the domain as a set of all allowable values for the variable x. Ask yourself, is there anything x can't be? Is there any number that is not allowed to be substituted for x? The range is the set of all outcomes or answers for the function. So we have some problems with some of our equations, and it's right here we're talking about if you try to type in your calculator 2 divided by 0, you're going to get something that's basically going to say you can't do it. Okay, so we can't divide by 0. So we're going to have a problem in our domain when something on the bottom of a fraction is being forced to be equal to 0. So if we look at x minus 8, we want to ask ourselves, well, when is it equal to 0? Because there's going to be a problem there. So if we add 8 to both sides, so x is equal to 8, this is a problem. X can't be 8. Because if you go up here and say 8 minus 8, we would get 0, which is not allowed. So when they write the domain, they say the domain of f is x. This line right here means such that x is a real number, and x is not equal to 8. So on this one, we're going to have a problem right here because this can't be equal to 0. So when is it equal to 0? That's our problem. So we would solve this by subtracting 2 from both sides of the equal sign. So x is equal to negative 2. This is our problem. Everything else is okay though. So we would say the domain of f is all x's such that x is I'm going to draw my real number like that, is a real number, and x is not equal to negative 2. Okay. There is no bottom of a fraction here, so the only two places you're going to have trouble with your domain are if you have a fraction that whenever the denominator is equal to 0, or if you're taking a square root of a negative number. And on this lesson, we're not having to deal with that one quite yet. So there's no fraction here. It doesn't matter what we do. The domain is going to be all real numbers. So on this one, you're going to say the domain of f is all real numbers. Okay, same thing here. This would, if we graph this would make a parabola. So we don't have a problem with that. It's all real numbers. Okay, absolute value of x minus 4. Remember, this is going to make your v. So there's not going to be anything that won't work for this. So it would be same thing. The domain of f is all real numbers. So bottom line, the domain of a function is all real numbers unless there is a fraction. So if you don't see a fraction, you don't have to worry about it, or a square root or a logarithm. And the main one that we talked about today was the fraction. And this is all that this one's going to go over. So you're going to look and make sure that there are no fractions. If there is a fraction, you're going to find when it's equal to 0. And that's the one place where it's not going to be allowed.